I think too many people read news articles and read TechCrunch and get into this, idea that there is only one way to succeed, and that is to build a security platform. And so, let's go. I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea. I have my own goals, and the reality is that those platform plays may very well be aligned with my ambitions, but that doesn't mean that they are, that everybody should pursue them.
Welcome to a new episode of All Aboard, the show where we have real conversations with IT and security practitioners. No fluff, no talking points, just straight talk from experts and advice for tackling the toughest problems facing cloud-forward companies today. I'm your host, Alex Bovee, CEO and co-founder of Conductor One. Welcome to the latest episode of the All Aboard podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Ross Haleliuk, head of product at LimaCharlie and writer of one of the best newsletters in security space, Venture and Security. Ross has sharp insights on cybersecurity and startups, so I really couldn't wait to dig in with how he thinks about the industry and where he sees things going. Together, we discuss why Ross started a newsletter and how he decides what to write about, where he lands on the platform versus point solution debate, his hiring advice for early-stage cybersecurity companies, and what success looks like for startups hoping to make their mark on the industry. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Super exciting podcast today. I'm joined by Ross Haleliuk. I think I said that right.
You absolutely did.
Rushed it, nailed it. Okay, we're all done. I get to leave the podcast now.
Done.
Just kidding. Thanks for joining, man. I really appreciate it. I think our listeners and folks are going to be really stoked about this episode. You are security famous, if there's such a thing.
There isn't.
You write the Venture and Security newsletter, which has 13,000 followers, something insane. And I know I'm definitely a big reader. I love what you do. Maybe just introduce yourself. Who are you? And in particular, I think as it relates to the Venture and Security newsletter, like how'd you get started?
Yeah, so I do wear a ton of different hats. So I'm Ross. I'm a head of product over at LimaCharlie and author of Venture and Security. I recently published a book about building cybersecurity startups, back in January, which fortunately became an Amazon bestseller. Trying to stay active in the ecosystem as an advisor, as an angel investor, and in all other capacities. How did I get started, especially in the context of venture and security? That is an interesting question. So I'm not a deeply technical security practitioner who has spent several decades in the industry. Instead, I'm a product guy. So I've worked across different industries. I was in e-commerce, retail, wholesale, financial technology for a number of years. And then several years ago, I became incredibly passionate about cybersecurity. And coincidentally, one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie was looking for somebody to run product, and I ended up joining. And as I did, I came to realize several things. One is that although I was able to find a lot of great technical content about the technical side of cybersecurity, it was fairly hard for me to piece together different bits and pieces about the business side of the industry. Like, how does the go-to-market in the industry look like? How does product strategy look like? What are the different players? How do they impact the ecosystem? Like, what are their incentives? Like, in which way do they add value? In which way do they contribute? Like, at what point are they in conflict with one another? Like, how does the fundraising environment look like? What are the different investors? Like, how are they different from one another? So all of those things were fairly hard to find the answer to. And over time, as I would meet more and more people and sort of build my own understanding of the industry, ask smart people dumb questions, like read everything I could read, go to events, go to conferences. I started to piece the answers, at least my perspective about those answers together. And at a certain point, I was like, man, if it's taken me such a long time to find the answer, I think somebody else might find it useful if I do share what I've learned. And so I did. I wrote one post, and I had a bunch of people reach out saying, hey, this was super useful. Thank you for doing it. And I was like, okay, well, I guess people are probably finding some value in it. So why not do more of it? And then I wrote another post. And so fast forward to today, and it's been several years of consistent, I want to say once per week, like almost every week, writing of venture and security.
That's like the most entrepreneurial story ever, because
to summarize it, like in a nutshell, basically your answer was, I had a problem and I solved it.
Fundamentally,
And it
yeah.
turns out other people have the same problem. It's like,
Fundamentally, yes. Although I do have to admit, see, I'm a product guy. I'm definitely interested in building something
sure,
in
yeah.
cybersecurity myself. The timing is TBD. I think I have a much more pragmatic approach to the idea validation, though. Like I'm a big believer in finding a problem that people care about, finding a problem where people have that hair on fire experience of like, hey, I have to have it solved. While here it was more opportunistic. So I do think you can absolutely arrive at an interesting idea, like in the startup scene, by doing what I did just in the context of product. But that isn't the only way to do it. That's how I think
Yeah,
about it.
I mean, yeah, super fair. I'm really curious is you, so your answer was also like extremely analytical. It was like the most product management answer I think I've ever heard or something. It was like,
I
I
feel I
want,
feel like you're just complimenting yourself.
I am, it's one of those, like, it's a two-sided compliment because, we have like two product guys
Yeah.
on the, the podcast here.
Yep.
One thing I love about your articles is they are, in my mind, it's like the stratechery of security. They're, really real big deep dives on, like really salient questions about how to build a business, go to market, product questions. How do you come up with the ideas? Like, what is your process for saying, hey, you know what, I want to go deep on go to market, or I'm going to ask you about it later, but platform versus point solutions, things like that. Like, how do you kind of pick what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, so I have a very basic process, and like even in terms of the tech stack I use, like it's really just a bunch of Google Docs stitched together. So there isn't any kind of exciting platform. I haven't used ChatGPT for venture and security, like
I was
not
going to
not
ask you
once,
about that.
not once, and for a very specific reason, because you see. I think there are many people who see quote unquote content production as sort of the end goal. And so they're just trying to churn out a bunch of different articles, social media posts, and blah, blah, blah. And again, I don't think there is anything wrong with that. It's just, whatever you're interested in. For me, writing is first and foremost just a way to crystallize my own thoughts. And hence why, I wasn't the one who came up with this phrase, but I've read it somewhere, although I cannot attribute it to the right person because I've forgotten who that was. I write because I don't know what I think until I write it down.
Mm,
And so in
mm.
a similar way, like I approach the whole process as well, where for me, I have one running Google Doc with a bunch of different thoughts and ideas, and they come up randomly. We will be having this conversation today, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, I will be like, "Hey, that was an interesting perspective. I'll just take a note and dump it into that doc." And what ends up happening, is sort of after some time, I end up at the point where I just, I skim through that doc and I start seeing some patterns and some things that are related, at which point I'll bring them into a separate doc. And then over time, I will keep adding more and more and more. Again, random thoughts, random ideas, random perspectives, random links. I'm reading some article, I'm reading some social media post, and it's like, oh, this is relevant to this other thing that I've been looking into, and I just dump it in there. And then on one sunny Saturday, when most people are going to go out with their families and play beach volleyball or whatever people do these days, I will sit down and I'll glue my butt to the chair and just get myself through it and say, okay, like let's go over it. Like what is here? Like what is the problem? Like let's analyze it. Let's understand it. So it's a fairly, I want to say, it's a very unstructured, very like loosely structured process, if you will. But the idea is that I never want to sit down and open blank document and just start writing because it's hard. It's incredibly hard, especially because this isn't the thing I do full time. This is just several hours over the weekend. So I want to make sure that I have some materials and I accumulate those materials over a long period of time. And I'll tell you that ideas are easy. What's much harder is deciding, is this truly worth talking about? Like, is this like, do I actually have an opinion about this? Should I be the one having an opinion about this? And that's also a funny question because if you look at my blog, I don't ever talk about, how companies should secure themselves, what tooling they should buy and so on and so forth. It's not my battle. Like, I'm not a security practitioner and I'm not crossing that line. Like, I may have a perspective, like there's some things I've seen that may look like an advice, but they're never like if you actually open an article, it's never telling people how to do their jobs.
This makes so much sense to me. I love the chaos of the upfront process too, in terms of like idea collection and aggregation and trying to like form some sort of a post that seems like it makes sense to talk about. And also that super resonates with me that starting from zero is so hard. Whereas like if you just have like even a couple blurbs of an
Yes.
idea, but I'm really curious though from the point I get the upfront part about sort of like storming and collecting ideas and aggregating those into something. You sit down on the Saturday, it's beautiful outside. Are you usually then like forming an opinion and writing an article all in one sitting, or do you have to iterate on that? Do you try to validate your opinion after you've written an article? Like what's that process of actually getting like a coherent thought down on paper, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that that really depends on the topic, and it depends on what exactly I'm looking at. There are many topics, and in fact, the vast majority of the things I write about, they're not analytical. They're not, deeply analytical research pieces about X. They're my opinions about X, and I'm very upfront that that is my perspective. Yeah, the answer to that is truly it depends. Like there are some areas, like for example, I remember I was working on an article about the great resignation of security leaders, and the thing that made me curious is how many security leaders of Fortune 500 enterprises leave their jobs after, what is it that people say, like 2 years, like 1.5 years. And like there was no better way to find out than to figure out the list of like the CISOs of Fortune 500 companies and then check every single one of them and like try to look them up on LinkedIn and see what that looked like. So for me, like I try to do very little of those sort of deep research pieces because simply I don't have time. There
Yeah.
are people, for whom being an industry analyst, for example, is their full-time gig, and they absolutely can justify doing this kind of stuff. I cannot. So for me, it's more of a process of forming an informed opinion rather than like a well-researched, 100% unbiased or like as unbiased as possible perspective. And that's why my biggest one of my biggest disclaimers is that it's biased. Like it's my
Yeah.
opinions, it's my perspectives. They're informed by the people I talk to, by the things I see, and it is super biased because it just so happens that I like talking to people who are on the edge of their fields and who are trying to push things forward. And the vast majority of the industry, not just in security, but in any other industry, are not those kind of people. Like the vast majority of the people in any space are people who do their job 9 to 5 and then go home and spend their time with their kids and loved ones, as most people should. I definitely get biased, and now having relocated to San Francisco, like that is only getting worse because the people I'm talking to these days, they're people who are often thinking about very futuristic view
Oh
of
yeah.
of
You
the
just you
industry.
you just made the problem worse for yourself. Okay,
Yes,
so I love that you own the fact that it's an op-ed. You're writing opinions and you're
yeah,
taking opinionated stances on things. Let's talk about some of those opinions. I think this is I loved going to the process. Super curious, just at a personal level, how you came to write on these topics and what your process was. But would love to explore some specifics. I you know I read as much of your work as I can. A few things that have jumped out for me recently. I would love to dive deep on the first one, and this is just so top of mind for me because, and obviously we have a little bit of a dog in this fight because we're a vendor,
sure.
but platform versus point solutions. It does feel a little bit to me like the world waffles between those over like some secular level, right? Like there's platformization, then we go to point solutions and platformization again. Maybe that's not actually the way it's going to go down, but I'm really curious in your mind, how does cybersecurity evolve? Do you think there will be platforms? Will there be an Uber platform? Are point solutions going to reign supreme? Does that change based on the market segment? Just like really curious to get your opinions all up on this.
Yeah, that is a good question. And frankly, I think that the answer is like already out there. Like if we look at platforms today, like they exist, they generate a decent amount of revenue. They have captured a good percentage of the market, but they don't necessarily solve all the problems. And I think the way, like, I would like to peel back that onion and say, okay, why is it that that we have so many different perspectives, and why is it that we have so many different point solutions, and why is it that we have like very few platforms? And I guess the reality is that there is no such thing as platform. Platform is a point solution that was started in a big enough market where the founders were able to execute incredibly well and grow the company to the point where instead of having one point solution, they were fortunate to add, 10 of them and expand their market share. But fundamentally, like name me one quote unquote platform that started as a platform. Like what does that look like? Right? You have to find a wedge, you have to find a niche, you have to prove yourself in that niche, and then you grow from there. So for me, the idea that somehow we have to have the industry consolidate, I can see the origins to that. And of course, it's very hard to to wish anything else when you're a security practitioner having to navigate like 70 or 80 individual tools. Like I absolutely understand why it is upsetting. And the number of tools in the ideal world should continue to decrease, but the reality is the opposite is true. We do have a large amount of venture funds that decided to focus solely on cybersecurity, and that raised like hundreds of millions and sometimes even billion-dollar funds to invest in cybersecurity startups. So when you have capital, that means there's going to be founders who are looking to to capture value or create value, and by utilizing the capital available and trying to turn that into something bigger. And the whole problem, like the whole point solution versus platform problem, like it has many different dimensions. But the one thing that I don't believe in is that 10 years from now, the industry is somehow dominated by one or two companies that have been able to sort of stitch together, 100 different point solutions and just own the market that way. It can be, like it is possible as sort of a stepping stone in that evolution. But if you have ever used products like, like Salesforce or any of the other sort of large, like big legacy tools, you know how complex they get. Like, yes, companies like Salesforce, like they're able to, to do tremendously well. But at the same time, it is hard to find a customer who would not get lost in that solution. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if that is how your security tool operates, there is an argument to be made that the ultimate sort of the peak of platformization, where there is like one or two platforms that, sort of consolidate the whole industry, is the point in time where we as an industry are going to be the most insecure. Because if all attackers need to do is to target one or two products, it becomes hard to defend it. And in the like, that's why I think, obviously, there are many people who have different opinions about Microsoft, but the fact of the matter is there are many people around the planet with a lot of their resources directed on getting into Microsoft infrastructure.
Right.
So if you can imagine, whether be it Palo Alto or some, or Microsoft or any other company X of the future, just consolidating the whole market, that is going to be the most targeted company out there. Like what are the chances that as soon as it gets so complex, it will still be the most secure solution and the best security choice? I think the chances are zero. So to me, the process of consolidation is an ongoing process. There are new threats that emerge. Like savvy founders start companies in those areas. Some of them, like some of those bets, go nowhere, and they just fall apart. They go out of business. Others become more successful. Then larger companies, whenever they need to expand their coverage area and their revenue sources, end up acquiring some of the winners in different areas, and the process sort of continues, right? Now that this area of security, quote unquote, consolidates, there's going to be another emerging area where somebody else is making their own bets and trying to get something off the ground. And when it fails, nobody ever talks about it. When it doesn't fail, a big vendor buys the small solution. So it's an ongoing process. And I don't think we will ever live in the world in which we have like 5 security tools that everybody can use.
I just want to say I hope that's the case, because I love your point about vibrant. There's a macro point here about the vibrancy of competition and trying new things and new products to solve new problems, and like the value that creates. The world also where everything just consolidates down to a single Uber platform or two, it just tells me that there's no innovation left on the product side and everything's just a distribution play. And to your
Yeah,
point, it's like as a product person, like that's so uninspiring.
it is. It is.
It just says like, oh, these products are just checkbox products that kind of suck, and this is just an arbitrage on distribution on getting an existing customer to buy a few more SKUs and a portfolio of
Yeah.
platform opportunities.
That said, I do think that the saying that the future is going to look like we don't know what the future is going to be, but we know it's going to be very different is true, and I think it rings very true in cybersecurity, where we operate in this like today we operate in the world where sort of we are surrounded by all of those topics of platformization, consolidation, point solution platforms, and we have learned as an industry to just operate in that world. But I would be shocked if like 2 decades from now we are still talking about those things. The funniest thing is that those trends have nothing to do with cybersecurity. Basically, the whole idea is that every single industry goes, oh, bundling and unbundling.
Bundling and unbundling, yeah.
Every single industry goes through the same two motions. I think it was some Mark Andreessen who said that there are three ways to make money: bundling, unbundling, and talking about bundling or unbundling.
It's so true. I mean, I can't even express to you how frustrated I am about like television. I remember when
Yeah.
I can remember many years ago when everyone paid for cable subscriptions, and then the great unbundling happened, and now I feel like between all the subscriptions I pay to like re-aggregate the existing channels that I had, I spend more
Yes.
now on all the subscription services than I ever did on
Yes.
cable television.
Yep.
That was the whole promise of unbundling. On this note, tell me a little bit more about. So you see a ton in venture investment, early stage startups. What do you see as sort of, have you been able to pattern match what makes successful companies in security? Like, is there a set of ingredients that you see sort of typically being consistent across early stage companies that are successful?
It's a tough question. It's always easier to find factors that lead to the opposite of success than it is to find, a perfect
Well,
recipe of
tell
success.
me about those too. I want to make sure I don't have any of
Well,
those going on.
we can, yeah, we can absolutely talk about it. But I think to me, like one of the key points that is important to make is that there are different ways to succeed in security. In the same way, there are different ways to succeed, in any other industry. So when you're asking about success, like what does success mean here? You see, if you have a company that you've bootstrapped and you're getting like 5 to 10 million in ARR, and you have a very lean team, the customers are happy with the solution you're offering. You're growing at the decent rate, not the venture scale, triple, double, but at a decent rate. Is that a success? Well, it depends. Like if your objective was to build a unicorn and that is what you got instead, it is probably not a success. But if your objective was to build a good, self-sustaining, sustainable business, that can very well be a great success. Like you can retire at the age of 30 and have a great life. So, like, what does success mean? Or, for example, if you are a startup and you have founders saying, okay, like we want to go sort of the venture-backed route, and we want to build an ambitious company, and they raise capital, they go for they shoot for the moon, and along their journey they realize that the market is much more competitive, and maybe their specific market segment that they're betting on is not doing that well. And if somewhere, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, they are still able to get a great acquisition offer and exit by returning money to their investors, at single digit X, by making, by having a great exit themselves, and by making their employees, financially more independent, is that a success? Well, it depends, right? Because if the objective was to build Palo Alto, and that's where they ended up, probably not. But if the goal was to build a company and then and solve a real problem, they could have very well achieved that. So I think too many people read news articles and read TechCrunch and get into this, idea that there is only one way to succeed, and that is to build a security platform. And so, like, let's go. I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea. I have my own goals, and the reality is that those platform plays may very well be aligned with my ambitions, but that doesn't mean that they are, that everybody should pursue them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Actually, switching gears a little bit on company building, one of the articles that you wrote recently had to do with people and hiring people, and in particular, sort of how you think about whether or whether you should bring people from larger, successful, cybersecurity companies to like your cybersecurity startup. This is like so fascinating to me because I think one of the biggest predictors of success for any company, frankly, is just like people, and do you get the right people on board? And
Mhm.
what's the team like? Can you talk a little bit more about that article? What was the, sort of the storming and norming, like figuring out that like, hey, this is something that I should have an opinion on? Did you see things? And yeah, maybe just talk a little bit more about that in terms of like hiring and people and how you think about team for early stage
Yeah.
cybersecurity startups.
Yes, so yes, I will. And before I do it, I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what problem you're looking at. What's super important is to think about it from the first principles. And so if you're talking about, what makes a startup successful, if you think about it from the first principles, then you're able to identify like what does success mean to you? Like what would that look like? And what are the factors that are most likely to contribute towards that success? And what are the factors that are more likely to lead you away from that success? In the similar way, I think we have to approach hiring, right? When we are looking about when we are looking to bring somebody on board, the question becomes, okay, what do we want them to do? Like, what will success for that specific role look like? And depending on the answer to that question, the kind of people we should be approaching, the kind of people we should be trying to get on board, the kind of people we should be, persuading to join us on our journey will be different. So if the problem we are trying to solve is to find someone who is going to, build a team and focus on strategy and, focus on sort of the bigger picture, then the next question is, okay, where are we most likely to find those people? And in my view, based on what I've seen, the answer to that is at larger companies, because that is where you have different layers of employees focused on different things, and you can very well find somebody who is incredibly good at that, like top strategic layer, at operating in that layer. At most startups, however, the need is different. Like for most startups, especially if you're talking about the early stage startup, there is a strong need to find somebody who is going to be a strategic thinker, but who can then take that thinking and execute. Not hire the team and have them do things, but do things themselves. Meaning, as a marketer, you have to be strategic in thinking about the go-to-market, but you also should be able to put together a marketing asset in Canva, or to send an email campaign and know how to use MailChimp or whatever tool your team is using. Or if you're on the sales call, you obviously have to be a great CRO and understand the buying cycle, understand the buying journey, but you also need to be able to take notes during the sales call and upload them into the CRM. And it's harder to find people who still retain that ability to execute and that hunger if you go to larger companies. It's always easier. And again, it's not that those people are not suitable for startups. It's more that you're much more likely to find professionals who are able to sort of work along, like who are able to zoom in and zoom out and do the work themselves at smaller companies. And that is where, where the expectations also mismatch the most. Because what I see quite often is, founders whose companies, frankly, are not just growing as fast as they would like to, which probably applies to like 95% of cybersecurity startups or any
Yeah.
startups, realistically
Right.
speaking.
Yeah.
Like this
I,
is
I've
this is
never I've never heard a single founder say my company's totally on a tear. I don't want to grow
yeah,
any faster.
yeah, yeah. And so people are right to look for shortcuts and to ask themselves questions. Okay, like what key ingredients do I need to obtain for me to move faster? Like how do I become successful? And because everybody knows that people are, as you've said, at the core of any successful companies, it's too tempting to say, you know what? Just look at this amazing engineer at Google. Like if I can just get this rock star on my team, like everything is just going to change. Or like, hey, this salesperson, like over at at Palo Alto or over at Microsoft, like they're crushing it. How awesome would it be if I bring them on board? And they do. And like some of the salespeople will have interest in startups, and they will join the team, and they bring a fantastic portfolio of of connections, and just like a great book of contacts, and they start reaching out to those people and saying, hey, I've just joined this company, like take a look at what we do, and nobody cares. And they cannot understand why is it happening, even though, like, when they moved from Zscaler to Palo Alto, that has worked tremendously well. When they moved from Palo Alto to Okta, like that has worked super well. Like their previous contacts, like take their call, have a look at what they're selling now, and quite often buy the solutions. It doesn't work the same way with startups because there is no brand visibility, there is literally no readiness for that startup to even sell to the enterprise. There is no support system, there is no documentation, there is nothing. And so, but founders want to believe that bringing that rockstar
Yeah.
employee, like whether it's in sales or in engineering, is going to make them grow faster and be more successful. And what they miss is that what makes you successful at a large company is very different from what makes you successful at a small company. Like a Google engineer, like a great 10x Google engineer, is probably highly focused on their area, on their specialty. Like they truly know that one problem incredibly well, and they're probably the best person on the planet to tackle that problem. When you're at a startup, however, you need somebody who is much more like, who is a generalist, who can switch different tasks, who can be like a Swiss knife employee, who can solve different problems depending on what the startup needs on that specific day. And that may or may not be that great employee from the large company. So to me, it's not about making a statement that people from large companies don't make great startup employees. That is absolutely untrue. In fact, many great founders come from those environments. Like many great employees come from those environments. But it's like it. What is needed is the understanding that, one, what makes people successful in one environment doesn't necessarily translate into the other environment. And two, if you want the same person to be, if you want to take a person from a totally different environment and make them successful in your, in your company, that person has to be willing to change the way how they do things and to grow and learn and adjust. Some people are well suited to do it, and others are less flexible, or just frankly at the stage of their life where they don't want to be sending email campaigns.
Yeah,
And that's
totally.
important to understand.
Yeah, everything you said resonates with me so much. I think the other piece there that I've seen is as you get bigger in a company, like really big companies reward specialization. So it's like you're
Yep.
incentivized because you have to be really good at like a particular part of demand gen or sales or marketing. And they really don't, you don't need people that can sit across doing 10 different things because there's people who do those jobs in those other places. So it's like you really,
And yes, and in fact, if you want to be a generalist at a big company, you're going to clash with every single employee because you will be stepping on somebody else's toes, whose
totally.
job it is to be in charge of that specific area of
It actually
specialization.
kind of makes you a little bit less successful if you love being a
Yes,
generalist and you love jumping on
yes,
other things. I've 100% seen that in my career. The interesting thing, though, is sort of a meta point. I don't know if this is like a warning for hiring, managers in early stage companies or not, but I think a lot of times people don't, if you've never worked in a startup or early stage company, you don't really truly know what it means to work in an early stage company. People will say things like, "I want to go to a startup so I can work in a faster environment," things like this. And it's like, yeah, but like you're not going to have as much support as you did in a
yes.
large company. There's no one who does that other thing for you. And I think a lot of
Yeah,
times people don't connect that. So at least
yeah,
on a personal level, I always try to make that super clear. Like, hey, here's what it looks like. Here's what is available. Here's what's not available. Here's what probably is going to be a little bit of a rude awakening. And then just make sure people are coming into that with like eyes wide open.
Yeah, yeah, and people also often talk about ownership and being able to make maybe, a bigger impact as a smaller company, and like all of that is true. But what is also true is that you may have no direction whatsoever. In fact,
Totally.
you may see that the company itself needs to change the way it approaches different problems. And there is nobody else who is just going to give you a strategy and say, okay, and now go and execute in your area. It's like, no, no, no. If you are in charge of engineering and you see that something is not working in customer success, you have to speak up, you have to work with those people, and you have to try and steer the ship in the right direction, because at the end of the day, you're a small team and everybody is in it together, and
That's
everybody
right.
succeeds or fails together.
Yeah, that's right. And you have a lot more ownership over those issues. We're getting close to wrap up. Last, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question, but do you have any hot predictions for cybersecurity for 2024, 2025?
You know, honestly, I think, in the short term, the future is going to look very similar to the way the present looks like today. Like
Sure.
fundamentally, yeah, AI is going to make a difference, but at least in the short term, it's going to be, sort of using the new tools to make the existing security products more effective and more efficient, and to sort of make a statement that we've got AI in this tool, as opposed to actually trying to realize the true potential of what that is able to bring. I do think that we are probably going to see in the next several years a next wave of what's called AI winter, where there is
Mm,
every several years there is this process whereby investors become fairly cold about new startups, and so do the customers. Again, it doesn't mean that the true potential of artificial intelligence will not be realized. What it means is that we have created very high expectations for what AI is going to do, and it's inevitable that we will have to lower our expectations and go through that adjustment to hit the reality and to see, like, where is this technology truly game changer, and where do we still need to solve the same core fundamental problems that are just not going to be solved by adding an extra layer on top.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. It definitely feels like we are starting to be on the backside of the height of expectations of AI. So it does feel like that's
Mhm.
gonna maybe that'll calm down a little bit. And then it's interesting you said like just solving the core problems in security. I feel like so much is maybe this is my 2 cents as we're signing off here. I feel like so much of security is solving the same old problems over and over and over
Mhm.
again, just just in like slightly better ways, or there's a new twist on it, like it's cloud instead of on-prem or something like that. But a lot of times it's like the same problems, new
As
solutions. Or
as it should be. Like, frankly, in
right,
my view, as it should be, because problems haven't fundamentally changed. There are some attack vectors that were not known before. There are some new technologies that we didn't have to worry about before. But fundamentally, like in 2024, like if you're talking about predictions, people still worry about their cloud environment. People still worry about their identity. People still worry about their endpoint. People still worry about their password managers and the fact that people, like employees, may not be using them. We still care about MFA, and a lot of the attacks that we see happen because some server, some application, some user didn't have MFA enabled. So it's all the same basic problems, and that's a good thing, because I mean, on one hand, it can be discouraging to some people. Like, they may say, well, we've been trying to tackle these problems for such a long time, and they are still unsolved. But on the bright side, we know everything about those problems. We know them in and out. And so now is the time for us to say, okay, if here's what we've tried, here's what didn't work, here's what did work, here's what we've learned from all of it. Let's take all of those learnings and design something that is going to solve the problems better. Like, the same, you see, security is not unique in that regard, right? 10 years ago we had cars, we have cars today. Like, the fundamental value of car is that it takes you from point A to point B. Like, that hasn't changed. Like, the problem is still the same. You want to get from point A to point B. The technology has evolved. It's now much more comfortable. There are all kinds of assisting features. But at the end of the day, if you strip all of that, you're still just trying to get from one place to another, ideally in a safe manner. Security is no different.
yeah, totally agree with you, man. Okay, awesome. I feel like I just got a master class in clear thinking from you, so I really appreciate that, Ross. This was like a phenomenal recording. I know anybody who listens is going to love it. I feel like I learned a ton more, and we'll definitely have to have you back on and do a deep dive in some other topic at some point. We'll figure something out. But thanks for coming on
It's
today. I
been
really
a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you,
a
man.
pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at Conductor One. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductor1.com. Till next time.